administration, there is this new development here. A report that came out recently said no progress for African Americans on home ownership, unemployment, and incarceration in 50 years. And so I feel as though African Americans or Black people, people of color, are ignored largely, and they pay more attention on all of these other issues and hot button topics. And this is just as much of a hot button topic, has been for many, many years, decades. And it goes on to talk about the problems that have happened. So there's a woman that is pictured here, and it's in New York. A woman walks by a housing project in a crime-ridden Brownsville section of Brooklyn. And so where there is housing issues and, a lot of governmental issues that go on in, communities that are low income or poor, there is going to be crime, of course. So convened to examine the causes of civil unrest in Black communities, the Presidential Commission issued a 1968 report with a stark conclusion, and which I said before, I didn't think this was a stark conclusion. I think most of us who are Black Americans, we know that this has been an ongoing problem. This is something that's always ignored, and they never seem to address any of these issues and have any resolution for solving it, and which they do, but a lot of it has to do with white supremacy, unfortunately. So America was moving towards two societies, one Black and one white, separate and unequal, 50 years after the historic Kerner Commission identified white racism as the key cause of pervasive discrimination in employment, education, and housing, which is still going on today, unfortunately. There has been no progress in how African Americans fare in comparison to whites when it comes to home ownership, unemployment, and incarceration, according to a report by the Economic Policy Institute released on Monday. In some cases, African Americans are worse off today than they were before the Civil Rights era movement culminated in laws barring housing and voter discrimination, as well as racial segregation. So 7.5% of African Americans were unemployed in 2017, compared to 6.7% in 1968, still roughly twice the white unemployment rate. The rate of home ownership, one of the most important ways for working and middle-class families to build wealth, has remained virtually unchanged for African Americans in the last 50 years. Black home ownership remains just over 40%, trailing 30 points behind whites, who have seen modest gains during that time. The share of incarcerated African Americans has nearly tripled between 1968 to 2016. One of the largest and most depressing developments in 50 years, especially for times more likely than whites to be jailed or in prison, compared to 5.4 times more likely in 1968. We have not seen progress because we still have not addressed the issue of racial inequality in this American country, said John Smith, an economist and vice president of the Economic Policy Institute, citing that the racial wealth gap and continuing racial discrimination in labor and housing markets still persist. So one of the key issues is the disadvantages so many African Americans face right from the very beginning as children. The wealth gap between white and Black Americans has more than tripled in the last 50 years, according to Federal Reserve data. The typical Black family had zero wealth in 1968. Today, the median net worth of families that are white is $171,000. is 10 times that of Black families. The wealth of Black families has accumulated is negligible when it comes to the amount of money needed to meet the basic needs during retirement and pay for college tuition of children's education and put to a down payment of a house or to cope with job loss or medical crisis. So the lack of economic progress is especially startling given that Black educational attainment has improved significantly in the fast almost as likely as whites to have completed high school. And 1968, 54% of Blacks graduated from high school compared to 75% of whites. Today, more than 90% of African Americans have a high school diploma, just 3% percentages points shy of white high school completion rate. And the share of young African Americans with college degrees has more than doubled, 23% since 1968, though Blacks are still half as likely as whites to have completed college. Yet, hourly wage of typical Black workers grew by just 0.6% a year since 1968, and African Americans make 82.5 cents of every dollar earned by a white worker, the report said, and a typical Black household earns only 61.6% of the annual income of a white households. So with Black college graduates continue to make less than white college graduates. 1960 and a half times more likely to be in poverty than whites. So we have expected to see much more of a narrowing of a gap given the big increase of educational attainment among African Americans, Smith said. A separate book, Healing Our Divided Society, to be released Tuesday at the DC Forum, also examines how little progress has been made in the last too many African Americans into slums and children into inferior schools. White supremacists have become emboldened now, and there is too much excessive use of force, often deadly by police, especially against African Americans, notes the book, co-edited by Fred Harris, a former U.S. Senator, sole surviving member of the Kerner Commission. Whereas the Kerner Commission called and education initiatives over the last 50 years, America has pursued massive and sustained incarceration framed as law and order. The book said, mass incarceration has become a kind of housing policy for the poor. In 1968, Kerner Commission reported ended on a note of deja vu, citing witness who recalled similar analysis, recommendations, and ultimately inaction following the government investigation nearly 50 years of racial disorder, the harsh poll mix of Black revolt and the white repression have been seen and heard before in this country, the report concluded. So it's basically still has not really changed. When I say that, all these things that come in the way, like you have the gun laws, the fight with guns, all these other things that are happening that kind of crop up, then all of the issues with Black Americans or African Americans, it seems to get pushed further and further and further back. It's easy to ignore them. And so that's what's happened over many decades. It's always the same thing. And so other issues will come up. And now we have other new issues that have come up. And the original issues that have always been there are always ignored, always the last to be heard, if ever heard. And so this basically confirms some of the things that I had talked about in previous videos about how some people will treat you on a job, how you're ignored, or if you aren't ignored, they test you on everything that you know. If you say you went to any college, some people don't even actually acknowledge that you went, or if they acknowledge you went, they don't trust that you're telling the truth. Um, Sometimes people of color are treated as if they don't know anything, even though you might have went to school or whatever, or it's looked at as, oh, they just feel sorry for you, or how did you get that affirmative action? You know, I've said that in previous videos. There's certain things that people do, and so that's the sad part in that here, and it's basically a lot of this is, like I said, it boils down to money. See, the issues are really real, like home ownership, unemployment, incarceration. Incarceration has its own little craziness there because, you know, like they said, it's like a place for the poor, a place for the people that are in poverty. And then two, they're making people work in these prisons, and you're not getting really paid any money, you know, so it's free, it's like free labor. With people who are incarcerated, you know, they make products and things like that. And then the unemployment thing, I already told you, there's a lot of discrimination that still goes on. Sometimes they can get your application, they hear your name, and if it sounds to them like a black sounding name, then they throw it out and they pick somebody else over you. There's also things that happen if you do get hired, and you can count how many black employees work at the job on one hand versus the white and Hispanics and all the other people that look to be white or whatever. Then you have the home ownership issue. And so we have this thing with homelessness, and then we have this home ownership, people trying to make gains. If you do work at a job for a period of years, and you work on your credit score, and you do things as an African American, you look at the housing market, how it is, you know, it's gotten crazy, and it's almost impossible to get decent housing, you know. And then you want something where you're not suckered into something where, like what happened in 2008, where a lot of people, they had these high interest rates, and they paid into these shiesty they dealt with shiesty realtors and shiesty banks, took advantage, and usually took advantage of poor people who didn't have any financial literacy. And then they had that housing crisis, and a lot of people lost homes, and so it affected a lot of people. And so that's why you have, like, I think there was a commercial that was on TV. It's called "Keep Your Home California" or something like that, because there was so many people that were affected by that. And that was in the Obama years, when he came in to office. And so there were a lot of provisions to try to help people to try to keep their homes or save their homes. Unfortunately, some people weren't able to do that. So this is the thing that is going on, and it, you know, despite all of what's happening right now. And so this is your typical, like, it looks like a housing project. See, it's in the East Coast, and they build up high. But here on the West Coast, a lot of the housing projects, they're not really tall and high up. When I used to live in the Midwest, in Chicago, I saw what was Cabrini Green back in my days. I don't even think the place exists anymore, but it was tall like this building, such as this building here. But like here, like if you go into the areas of California and you see the projects are like, they sit low, but they're like beehives, and you know, there's these little alleyways, and it pretty much everything looks the same. And I knew some people who lived in those places. I wanted to go and see what it looked like on the inside, and it looked really, you know, some of the walls looked like it was either brick or something like that. It looked like, you know, like how if you go in a prison and, you know, the walls are like brick or something, or, you know, it just looks, it didn't look inviting. That's all I gotta say. But of course, I don't know, maybe things have changed now. I heard that a lot of some of the housing projects, they were gonna tear them down and redo them, or they were gonna, I don't know if they were going to redo them, or they were going to like put other apartments there. And pretty much I heard some stories that people might be displaced in those areas. So I don't know how that's going to go. I think there's a lot of poor people that, they rely on the public housing system, for a place to stay, and that's all they have, because some people's circumstances are different than others. You don't know if they have pre-existing injuries, something could have happened to them. Maybe at one time they were working, they could have had a car accident, something happened to them, they're on disability permanently. So everybody's a case by case situation. So there's a lot of insensitivity out there. So I know some people don't want to hear, oh, I don't want to hear the violin sob stories or whatever, but it's true. Some people, especially elderly people, I mean, at some point in their life, hopefully, that's an accomplishment, or it could be a nightmare under this type of dealings, what you're going through, hearing these things like this. It's like, if you don't have any retirement, I mean, what do you do? And so they did mention that there. And so a lot of people, they try to get into home ownership so they can have something that they can leave their kids behind, or um, they can build equity in, and then they can save money. And some people realize that when you put people in a predicament where they're not able to thrive, and they're not able to build any income for their families and what have you, and then you set them further back. And so it pretty much puts them in a vicarious situation. So a lot of this has been perpetuated through racism, and it's a systemic racism. It's one of those type of things where it pushes you out and you're the lesser than. And so this is an unfortunate situation as well. I thought it was something that should be brought out. I know there has been a host of different people who have mentioned these topics, even on YouTube, online, on other sites and stuff. But this is some real issues that are happening right now. And I don't think they get put into the forefront until, well, until people start to get upset and speak out, or something breaks. But this has always been ignored. It's always been there. It's a lingering thing that has never been really addressed fully. It's always been touched on, but there's never a reprieve or resolve for any of these issues. So I think these are important because most people strive for this, right? Home ownership, to get employed, and to stay out of trouble, and if you're afraid of the police, you're afraid because you're Black, you're like scared to get pulled over because you've seen those videos with Philando Castile and some of those other videos. As soon as you even do anything, you're like, oh my God. For us, or people who are Black, people who are African American, it's a fear. It's like, oh, I don't want to get pulled over by the police. I hope everything that I have is here, because I don't know if I get a good cop or a bad cop, and it's your word against theirs. And so lately they've been getting away with a lot of stuff, killing people. So that is the fear that we have to walk around with. Um, Home ownership, it's hard to come by. The markets are high out here. Um, you have to get in a program just to qualify for home ownership. Unemployment. I mean, I've stressed about some of the issues with the ways people treat you when you do get on a job, and you get treated, there's no career advancement. They just want you in the same spot, or they don't talk to you as if you're educated. They talk to you in a way where you don't know anything, or she doesn't know anything, or whatever. Or they treat you a certain way, or you can count how many Black people are working there. So you feel as though you're the token Black. You're just trying to hang on to your job because there is no other way out, because everybody that is running these organizations are basically white. And so you don't know what else to do. And then even if you have degrees and all that, you're not taken serious, and then it takes you longer. And by the time you do get in a position where you want to be, you probably have gotten much older. You're having eyesight problems, or you're having problems with whatever because of older age. And now they give you what you need, but now you're at retirement age almost. you know. So they built that much trust in you. We known this person for X amount of years. So okay, we'll let her finally be a teacher, or we'll let her finally be an instructor, or we'll let her finally be an administrator or a principal or whatever. But it to how many years? By that time you're ready to retire. So it's like, they know what they're doing. So it's in any other jobs, the same thing. So it's crazy. It's a lot of stuff that goes on in some of these places of business or whatever. If you work for a corporate company, it may take you longer to get your foot in the door in certain areas, depending on, maybe and then it could be to a gender thing, could look at men differently than they do females. So it could be a number of things in these jobs. So there's a lot of issues. And, sometimes they see your name on an application. If that name doesn't look right to them, it doesn't sit well, they say, oh, wait, how many Black people do we have working here? Oh, we don't need any more. Okay, we're going to move this one out the way and we're going to accept this one. So you never know what the whole thing is. So I just thought this article really hit home because this stuff is really important. This is what's going on right now. But how many people are going to look at this? Because they're so busy looking at the gun thing. They're so busy looking at all these other things. So all these other things will overshadow what has always been happening 50 years. They just put out that memo. What was that memo? And I had it up here. It was from Congress.gov, the HR 1242, 400 Years of African American History Commission Act. And so that was put out recently. And so it talks about the different plans in here, talking about, all of the commission, what the commission must do. And so you can read it for yourself. It's in Congress.gov. It's the HR 1242, the 400 Years of African American History Commission Act. And so it talks about some of the issues, and we're still having problems. So, it's just a sad situation. Yeah, so this is the breeding ground for if they thought they had civil unrest before, this is a breeding ground for more civil unrest because, just say that this is happening and there's no action or intent to do anything behind this doesn't sit well with the general public, I wouldn't think. So this right here is not something that we as people did not realize was happening. We knew this was happening, but for them to do this now and post this in light of all of what's going on, it's like they're kind of saying, we acknowledge this is happening, but we don't want you to focus on that. We want you to focus on the gun thing right now. This is not as important as the gun thing. And so if you really pay attention to what these people are doing, they know this is happening. These people who are behind running all of this media and all this, who they know what's going on. So it's not like our voices haven't totally been heard. It's just we're being ignored. That's how I feel it's going. It's like you're being ignored and all these other issues are overshadowing what has already been there. It's just a boiling point. And so with that being said, if you want to look this article up, I believe this article also may have been posted in the Washington Post. Yeah, it was in the Washington Post. And so it's in the Wonkblog. And so it's a sad situation. I say it's sad because it just seems like it doesn't get any better. So I know what some people would look at this and say, well, I'm just going to put money away and save money, and I'm not going to worry about the rest, and I'm going to do my best to save money. But if you're marginalized, if you don't have room for career advancement, you can save money, but it would be easier. Wouldn't it be easier if you could make more money so that you can save more money? Wouldn't it be easier if you can actually get a job so you can start saving money instead of being discriminated from jobs. Wouldn't it be easier if you weren't accused of crimes that you didn't do so that you can stay active as a citizen and you're able to vote, you're able to have your civil liberties, and those are not stripped away from you because of some trumped up felony charge. You're also able to have the possibility of home ownership. That's something that where down the line, something to at least dream on. But if you look at home ownership, do you have to fear that you're in an area where it's still, even though they say they're not supposed to do redlining, you are felt like they don't want to sell this house to you, they want to sell to a particular group of people, so they do what is called steering. So I don't know if anybody is aware of that there's neighborhoods where they have realtors and they have different people that will steer people in different neighborhoods because of how you look, how you speak, or what your nationality or background or whatever it is. So you get steered in particular neighborhoods. So with that being said, like it says here in the report, and it actually is, you hear people say, well, what are your stats? What are your facts? You're not giving me any statistical data. Well, it states it in the report. There's statistical data, there's facts there. And so can't get any factual than that. Well, with that being said, thanks for listening.